I have put in the dark shadows. I'm still going to add more in here. I've added shadow in this entire area, and I've added shadow along the midrib on this side. Now, if you have trouble seeing these general shadows, squint at your subject, and it'll tell you where the darks and the lights have to go. The other thing I've done at this point is I've also put a little shadow, because this is a main shadow, I've also put a little shadow in the venation. I also put a little shadow in the venation, secondary veins, on this side, and I'm going to do it on this side as well. What I do is I lightly go over the vein, and because I'm putting graphite on everything, including the area next to the vein, so you can see just by doing a little bit of that, it'll tone back that vein so it doesn't look so drastically white. I'll put some value in the midrib and start to put in the pillowing. Now, looking at my specimen, I see that I have to go darker on this shadow along this side of the leaf. So instead of using a 3H pencil now, I'm going to use a 2H pencil and just gently add a little bit more value to some of these areas. Make sure that your pencil is very sharp so that you can control the amount of graphite going onto the page. And you don't want a harsh line. You want to be dark but blended into the rest of the area so you get a nice transition going on. But I want to get some of this darkness in here. And then I'm going to show you how we do the pillowing. We're in pretty good shape at this point, so let's do some of this pillowing. In the light areas, the pillowing has a dark edge to it. So let's work down here first. And with our number 2 pencil, we're going to put in some of this pillowing. But where you have the dark edge, you now have to blend that pillow to the rest of the blade. And that's what gives it its puffiness. Don't over-exaggerate it. You can always go back in later and darken things if you have to. Some of these lines are quite fine. They need to look like pillows. You don't want them to look like outline shapes. In some cases, you'll just have a line. Now in this light area, it's going to be important to really blend in these lines. And in some cases, you'll see these lines just fade into the shadow. And you'll notice as I put more darks around these pillows, the highlights now take on much more dimension because you've got the dark contrast against them. Now in the shadow areas, the lines will not be anywhere as distinct as they are in the highlight areas, but you still need to put in some value for them or around them, and then they start to look like little white lines rather than pencil strokes. And that's just by putting the line in for the shadow and then bringing the shadow from the next pillow up to it, leaving white space. But it all has to do with the relationship of values to the subject. And so you can see now that we have some pillowing going on. But don't make the mistake of trying to get these shadows correct in the first hit. You want to give yourself some time to make adjustments to those shadows as you're going along. Of course, if you have something that has less pillowing, you don't have to worry about this aspect. But it's a good lesson to know, and someday you may want to do a pillowed leaf, and you'll know how to do it. I have pretty much filled in all the tertiary veins and put a little shading around those that seem to have some shadow to them. Now what I'm going to do is go over the entire leaf again and just darken up at where all of the deeper shadows lie. So here's my reference, and you can tell it's a little bit dark along this edge, it's a little darker in this area, and it's darker all through this area. So I am going to add more value to those areas to make this look more like the front of the leaf. And you'll also notice that I've thinned out the secondary veins quite a bit, and they still could use a little bit more. And then I'm going to use my 2H pencil, and I'm going to put a very thin, dark line along some of these secondary veins in order to bring them out a little bit more. And then go back in. And these are going to be disappearing lines. You're not going to see these everywhere, so it doesn't look like an outline. But just in some important spots where it gets dark. But it's very thin. And then go back in, thin out with a 3H pencil. I'm going to thin those white lines so they're like threads. And that will give it the look of the front of the leaf. And really those thin lines are basically cast shadows, or where the pillowing rounds down into the vein. I'm going to darken this area with a 4H pencil. And what's important is that you make sure you go over everything, because you want to not only darken the blade, but you want to darken all of the tertiary veins and the secondary veins in those dark areas. Take your time, don't use too much pressure. There we have the front of the leaf.